Good morning. I have 10:30 straight up Central Time and want to go ahead and get started. We have so much information we want to share this morning. So there are a few folks still hopping on, but we'll get rolling. I'm Elizabeth Niedringhaus, thrilled to be here with all of you this morning. Excited to share how a gap assessment will accelerate any company's compliance journey and put them on track for a certification assessment. I am joined today, again, Elizabeth Niedringhaus, President and CEO of SSE. I am joined today with Bob Duffy, our COO, and Charlie Shudo, our CTO and CISO. Thank you both for joining me today. As I mentioned briefly, the countdown is on for CMMC. For those of you that are familiar, of course, the Title 32 rule went into effect in December of last year, which codified the CMMC program. The one rule that we've been waiting on, the Title 48 rule, that defines the CMMC acquisition requirements, finally had some action back in July. So on July 22nd, the rule actually moved into OIRA. That's the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. Typically, on average, a rule will spend 90 days or less, sometimes a slightly more, in OIRA review before becoming a final rule. So we are on the path. And in fact, the Title 48 rule and the supporting documentation propose imposing CMMC contract requirements on October 1st, 2025. So there is a date on the calendar, October 1, 2025. So we are on the countdown. As a reminder, that Title 48 rule defines 4 phases of implementation. The first phase that would start when the rule went into effect, so again, we're looking at that October 2025 timeframe here, right around the corner, would require every company to self-assess either to level 1, depending again on the contract, or level 2 for new contracts. So that self-assessment with very limited POAMs at level 2 is critical for new contracts as soon as October. Phase 2, which we've nicknamed Russian roulette, is when we will begin to see level 2 certifications required for select new contracts. So no longer the self-assessment, but the actual certification. And the reason why we call it Russian roulette is because, of course, it's select new contracts. Nobody knows for sure which contracts will be required, which will require the level 2 certification. So our best guidance is if you expect to bid on or be part of a solicitation that you believe will require level 2, in that year, you will want to think about obtaining your certification early in 2026, again, right around the corner. Following that, of course, is phase 3, which will begin 24 months after phase 1. And that's all option periods will require level 2 certification, and level 3 will be introduced and required for select new contracts. So that really, depending on the length of the contract you have, could be all existing contracts or a majority of the contracts you're currently working. And then finally, phase 4 would be Q2 2028, and that is all in. All solicitations, all contracts will include all the applicable CMMC requirements. Our agenda for today for the webinar, I'll just highlight some quick background on SSE. We want to talk through, given the 50+ gap assessments we've completed, the 8 common compliance pitfalls that we see over and over again. Go back to the timing and why now is such a critical time for every defense contractor. Again, walk through our gap assessment process, what's involved, what you can expect, share with you some real client feedback based on our gap assessments as it's been published in some articles, and again, then wrap up with why an RPO gap assessment and answer any questions you have. There is a Q&A button in the webinar. Please feel free as we're walking through the content to send in your questions. We'll try to answer them as we go. If not, we'll try to answer them at the end or certainly follow up after the webinar. For those of you who may not be as familiar with SSE, just some quick history. SSE founded actually back in 1966 by Susan Elliott. She was determined to get in on the ground floor of the PC in 1983. Of course, nobody knew how to use personal computers then, so SSE started as a training organization, and then very quickly those same companies turned to SSE for IT support, which grew into our managed services, and now today our cybersecurity IT managed service offering. We actually began to develop our cybersecurity expertise as a defense contractor ourselves back in 2009, managing special programs for our clients. We were ISO certified in 2013, currently ISO certified to the latest 9001:2015 standard. And it is really those mature processes that allow us to provide the kind of compliance solutions that we're supporting clients with today, because the rigor is in all of our processes, again, providing that foundation to support our compliance for our clients. And I am thrilled, as it's highlighted on the slide, to share that we are CMMC Level 2 certified. We actually went through the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program last November and are thrilled to have gone through it with our own solution set that we'll be sharing with you today, and again, achieving that certification. Real quick, before we hop in further, again, we have a suite of services to support companies in their compliance journey. Generally, the companies that are newer and trying to begin to figure out, get their sea legs under them, will begin with a readiness assessment. From there, with a high-level budget and roadmap, of course, then we will go through a full-blown gap assessment. I'm not going to spend that much time talking about that because that is the detail we'll be walking through in the webinar today. But of course, out of the gap assessments, any gaps that are identified, we can support your remediation of those either with policy templates, GPOs, or one of the 20+ tools in our tech stack that help companies reach compliance. One of the other big lifts that companies don't realize is the continuous monitoring that's required to show your ongoing compliance, evidence of ongoing compliance that those assessors are going to look for when they're in for your certification assessment. So again, companies can outsource that continuous monitoring to us. And then of course, we can serve as a CISO type role, supporting your ongoing compliance management, risk assessment, supporting your GRC platform, and of course, a resource as you work through that certification process. Bob, I'll get ready to turn it over to you here again. As I mentioned, 50+ gap assessments. We've seen some common themes over and over again where companies get tripped up that can have a huge impact on their certification and compliance journey. Can you share what those are? And
Thank you, Elizabeth. Happy to. And I'm going to ask Charlie to join me here because Charlie Shudo and his team are the ones that are going in, getting under the hood and working with our clients to not only assess them, but also document the very specific details that a certification auditor, a C3PAO, is going to be looking for during that process. So Charlie and team has put together just a quick high level 8 of the most common pitfalls that we see, and we'll walk you through those and then talk a little bit about the gap assessment process and how we can catch those before you go through that certification process. Charlie, could you please elaborate on a few of these for us?
Yeah, definitely. So first one on the list is just understanding all of the requirements. There are 110 controls, 320 objectives. If there's any questions on anything that you may not understand or may not know what you need to do, there is a level 2 assessment guide that's actually on the DoD CIO's website, public for everyone to view. Goes through and gives examples, things that you can put into practice that'll help you to understand all the different things that need to be uh, satisfied for a control or all those controls to be met. The second item is inaccurate or outdated compliance reporting. There are places in the control language that wants you to update documentation at certain intervals, reviewing your SSP to make sure it's updated at least at some time frame that you specify, or at least annually. So what people will do was create an SSP, create documentation, and never really touch it again. So you want to make sure that you're always continuously updating those documents to make sure they stay in compliance. Um, I was just talking about a system security plan. We come into a lot of organizations where they have policies, procedures written. They have all the technical implementations done, but they don't really have an SSP. System security plan is required if you're going to submit your score to SPRS, your NIST score into SPRS. So without a system security plan, you can't do that. But again, that system security plan, I like to call it like it's the Cliff Notes of your entire security program. So you want to have that updated and ready to go. Fourth item is documentation. So if we were to say, come into an organization, they have everything technically implemented, but they have no documentation, that NIST score is a negative 70. So that point swing is 180 points. Documentation is key, and it's also some of the hardest things to write because you have to pull in people from other departments to understand what your hiring process is. What do you do for background checks? Oh, well, what do you do for marketing when you're posting to public websites? Do you check to see if there's FCI and CUI in any of those postings? So it's very difficult to write that documentation. So it's very, very key that that's filled out and complete. Um, evidence and artifacts are not available. There is a misrepresentation of what some companies believe are artifacts. So an artifact is almost like a spreadsheet, a point in time printout of something, let's just say. So let's say you have a list of users. Okay, well, I have 20 users that can access my system. Well, we go into assessments and people just pull up, they pull up, M365 admin, in their GCC tenant, or they pull up, Active Directory and show here are my 20 users, but that's not the list of users that are approved to access the system. Those are the people that access the system. So an understanding of what artifacts are and what what required evidence is needed per objective per control is key. 6, non-compliant third parties. So you are able to use external service providers to provide services for you. That's key. If you're storing your CUI in the cloud, you want to make sure that they're a CSP, that they're FedRAMP moderate equivalent or FedRAMP moderate authorized. If you're using external service providers to provide security protection assets or anything like that, and it's part of your security program and part of your assessment, those companies will also be assessed to CMMC level 2 at that time. So there are risks with, hey, I've got my MSP and they take care of that, but are they adhering to the same requirements that you are? And if they're not, that costs you ultimately in the end. Seventh is changes to IT environment and scope. So this is also key after you're certified as well. So if you make a change, we've got a few listed here. So, spanning your physical or network boundary. So let's say you acquire an organization, you're going to add their network into your network, and now all of a sudden your scope is different. If you're already certified, you're going to have to go for recertification. So those changes are going to pull you out of compliance. You want to make sure that if you're planning something like that, that you're going to, okay, well, we know we need to reach out to our C3PAO and go for recertification. Let them know that that's happening and go from there. Or if you can plan it, closer to your 3-year time frame to minimize your cost, that's probably the best thing to do. But there are small things that can happen. So for instance, you want to go ahead and have on-prem email, you're going to go ahead and move it out to the cloud. Well, that's changing your scope because you were on-prem before, now you're in the cloud. So you want to make sure you plan those scope changes to make sure that they keep you go to your C3PAO and go through recertification at the same time. And then lastly is self-assessment. Again, we kind of talked about how do you know what evidence that you need? How do you know what you're doing is correct? Maybe you think you've got the control language understood, but maybe there's stipulations. So it's hard to grade yourself. So as of right now, we've done over 50 gap assessments. Okay, and those ranges, we've had our best score is a 65, and our worst score is a negative 167. Okay, average is negative 86 across all of those. But the biggest thing is the discrepancy based on what a company believes they are versus what we assess them at. It's a negative 133 point difference on average. So I'm not saying that you can't self-assess, but it's always better to have that third party that does this every day to be able to really truly help you to grade where you're at.
Thank you, Charlie. And that's all the more critical to why now. So why now? Let's talk about that. And let's talk about why now matters for organizations and for your business. As Elizabeth covered at the jump, CMMC rulemaking is nearly complete. The rollout is expected to begin Q4 this year. So a lot of times we get questions, folks will see that timeline that we put up and they'll think about their current contracts. And they'll ask a question, well, I could have until 2026 or 2027 until I need to get certified. Well, maybe, but if you're planning on participating in any new awards, you are going to need to self-assess much sooner than that. And an important thing to consider, those self-assessments are no longer NIST 800-171 self-assessments, where you can have a score of negative 167 with POAMs for unmet or partially met controls. The CMMC self-assessments, level 1 will allow no POAMs. Level 2 will be very restrictive with a minimum score of 88. Those are the sort of requirements that companies will be facing on day one when the rollout begins. Furthermore, gaps mean risk. If you have a score on record with the government and you don't have supporting documentation, an SSP or POAMs, you could be in potential False Claims Act liabilities. You should Google the Morse Court ruling that just came out a few months ago to see how misrepresenting cybersecurity compliance led to DOJ going after and assessing severe financial penalties on a company. Lastly, building a compliant program with all the pieces and components that Elizabeth and Charlie described takes longer than most folks realize. So understanding how much time do you have and how much time do you still need is critical. Why is it critical? Because it will impact your bottom line and sooner than most folks realize. Getting compliant early can put you in a stronger position for contract awards, can show differentiation in a crowded market, being able to tout that you're already CMMC compliant, that you meet those requirements, shows operational maturity. It shows reduced risks in fellow DoD contractors and subcontractors, including you in their bid process. No prime contractor wants to be surprised at the 11th hour that one of their key suppliers may fail an audit or doesn't have the sufficient documentation to be able to self-assess to level 1 or level 2. And lastly, getting started and getting working on this now before you have to by contract enforcement will get you a faster path through CMMC certification. Getting ahead of the lines, starting to engage with an RPO and then meeting some C3PAOs, finding out how long that queue will be for a certification audit, understanding now so you can roadmap and plan for all aspects of certification is key. So why do we recommend a gap assessment, specifically with an RPO? Several reasons. Number one, RPOs have been verified by the Cyber AB. They have passed a code of conduct, background check. Essentially, the Cyber AB is saying, hey, these companies know what they're doing as it relates to these requirements. Every RPO should have registered practitioners, certified CMMC professionals, experts in these requirements and what is needed to satisfy them. Also, gap assessments through an RPO, speaking firsthand for SSE and what we charge, following the same assessment guide that a C3PAO will use, they're going to be less expensive than when you go through that certification audit process. So rather than risk certification audit, failing it, having to start over, perhaps paying for that process again, going through the practice test or a mock audit via this gap assessment will allow you also the consultation for what you're not doing or what you may need to update to meet requirements that you can't get once you're in the midst of a certification audit. C3PAO is pass-fail. They're not allowed to consult. RPOs are allowed to consult and help you. So getting that assessment done with the consultation as to what you will need to ultimately pass will help get you prepared and ready to pass that certification audit. So what's involved? It's probably as fun as you're all thinking. It is a detailed evidence collection, deep dive documentation into all aspects of your organization as it relates to these compliance requirements. Technical aspects, yes, of course, but also policy procedure. Charlie mentioned HR, other departments. There are components of the 110 controls, 320 objectives that tie into all different areas of your organization. It is well beyond IT. Understanding, documenting these, and validating them against these requirements will be critical so that you have the very specific plans of action and milestones. In other words, your to-do list of what you need to remediate and how in order to pass a certification audit. At the conclusion of this engagement, you'll receive the following deliverables: a NIST 800-171 score that is validated by the supporting documentation that will come with it, being a compliance matrix for NIST 800-171 and CMMC level 1 and 2 requirements, but specifically a security findings and evidence traceability matrix, detailed information for your SSP or to update an existing SSP. Charlie mentioned evidence and artifacts. This is where our assessor team would document those specific things and tie them back to the control and objective within each of the requirements, just in the way that an auditor is going to look for it during that certification process. Lastly, one of the key deliverables, and Charlie will share some more info on this in a minute, would be plans of action and milestones for any unmet or partially met requirements. And what's critical about this is that it's done to the objective level, not just the high level control. Charlie, I'm going to ask you to come back in here and share a little bit about the SSP detail and the POAMs on these next slides.
Yeah, so inside of the SSP, like I said, Cliff Notes version of your security program, you're going to have every single practice control. Inside of that, you're going to talk about, what is supposed to be met under there, and then you have your implementation status. Met, not met, partially met, not applicable. If from a certification system, from a C3PAO, you will not have partially met. It will just be met, not applicable, just an FYI. Talking about your implementation details and then listing any objective evidence. The SSP should show that, like I mentioned, like a Cliff Notes version to say, okay, well, if I needed to understand what this control did, I could go to the implementation details and it would tell me where to go. It would tell me maybe, okay, well, if you go here, it shows the details on how this is implemented and things like that. On the next slide, you would see what a POEM document would look like. Now, just to give you a clarification, there are POEMs and there are OPAs, Operational Plan of Actions. A POEM document will come from a C3PAO. So this may look from, if you go through a certification assessment, this may show what it looks like. So again, you show on that previous slide, that's your SSP. And if something shows that it's not met or partially met, this is going to give you the blueprints on how to rectify those controls to make them compliant. So that's where, through a gap assessment from us, where you would see a partially met, that would give you, okay, well, I had 6 objectives, A, B, C, D, E, and F, but A, B, and C were documentation, and I didn't have that. So on the POEM document, you would have your description to show this is what A, B, and C didn't have, and here are the milestones, what we need to do to rectify that. So just wanted to kind of give you an understanding of how those two fit together.
Thank you, Charlie. And calling out again on this slide why this document is critical for organizations to understand what's in their POEMs. Reminder, 5-point controls, 3-point controls. When this switch flips to CMMC with the Title 48 rule and implementation beginning, 5-point, 3-point controls will no longer be allowed to be carried forward into CMMC certification. So understanding what your POEMs are and how you need to meet them and when is all the more critical. We're coming up on time, so I'm going to go through these next slides rather quickly. Elizabeth shared some detail about SSE at the beginning. This slide, and we will send these out afterwards to all attendees, shows some of our credentials. Most importantly, our experience directly with the DoD as a contractor and subcontractor since 2009, and ourselves being CMMC Level 2 certified. Ask your MSP, ask your RPO about their plans to do the same. We also wanted to share something we're very proud of, and that is some of the results and feedback of working with one of our clients. Eric and Crystal at PUC, a very, very good engineering firm down in Texas, were kind enough to offer some feedback that we could share. It's actually been published in several media outlets that you can see below and click to read more detail. But if I could paraphrase what we got back from them that was so powerful and we wanted to share, it was that they had already invested a lot of time themselves, as well as working with their MSP. And I would add that their MSP is top notch, and they themselves understand these requirements. Their organization had a lot in place, but it was a risk to go forward into certification without taking that step to validate everything that they had done and make sure they fully understood the extent of what they still needed to do. So working with an RPO allowed them to see beyond the lens of looking at things through their own organization, how an auditor would come in, how what they had done and what they were working on would stand up to the scrutiny of that assessment guide. So they shared some very good feedback about the process, what it delivered, and I'm pleased to say that we're working with them on an ongoing basis as a consultant, helping them with some of the policy and procedure implementations that they needed to fine-tune in order to meet requirements, as well as some new technologies that they're working to implement with their MSP. So even if you already work with an MSP, utilizing an RPO to validate that, and then looking at some of the solutions, and you see ours on the screen, that may only be needed to supplement what you're already doing. It doesn't have to be a wholesale rip and replace everything. This could be the easy button to validate what you've done, look at what you still need to do, and get you there as quickly and cost effectively as possible. So, if you're still not sure, and on some risks, what's at stake? Spurs underreporting, False Claims Act. Again, I would encourage everyone to Google and read that Morse Corp ruling and what it said. Minimum score of 88 to proceed with level 2 certification. Check where you are now, how confident you are that you would be able to meet that. Limited poem use. There are 44 requirements that cannot be poemed if we can make up a word. And there is a time crunch, even more so if you wait until contracts require certification. Elizabeth, back over to you for some Q&A and to wrap things up.
Absolutely. Charlie, what questions came in that you saw that would be helpful to share with the group and the responses there? I guess one question, Bob, why he's going back through and looking at those, what would a gap assessment like this in an RPO cost if a company came to SSC?
Great question. So a lot of people will say, hey, I've only got this many employees or this and that. Cost isn't necessarily based on employee size. This is strictly a labor exercise. So a standard gap assessment, let's assume that you have one network, one AD domain, where the CUI is being stored, processed, and transmitted, one physical location. The 4-week engagement average cost is going to be $20,000 to $22,000 depending on travel expenses. Larger organizations that may have multiple domains and CUI in different places, it could get a little more complex, but I would say 90% of our clients are right in that standard pricing range.
Thank you for sharing that, Bob. And again, just as it relates to our own experience in hiring a C3PAO, that is certainly less than half the cost of what we paid to go through that joint surveillance assessment with a C3PAO. So definitely a cost savings and the consultative nature of it. I know we're 1 minute over. Charlie, Bob, any other questions that came in that you all feel like would be important for the group to hear?
Charlie, one that we did have and we do get often, to what extent will a gap assessment look at what a client has currently with an MSP and whether those things meet requirements?
So when we first come in to do a gap assessment, we ask for ahead of time, once contracts are signed, to get all of the documentation evidence. And one thing we'll ask for data flow diagrams, SSP, POAMs, policy, procedure, and if you're using a third party, their customer responsibility matrix. So that is a list of all of the controls and objectives, and it basically says, my MSP is responsible for this, I'm responsible for that. Maybe it's a shared responsibility based on what we're doing. Maybe I have to write the policy, but they have to do the implementation. So that will really be a roadmap for us to understand as we're going through the assessment. Okay, well, now I need to include the MSP in this section and in this section and in this section to kind of plan out that whole process and be able to judge what they're doing for you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah.
I think we are right up on time. Elizabeth, I was just going to share Jason's information on the screen. If anyone on this call would like to have a conversation with our team, to bring in even some of Charlie's team to talk about where you are with your compliance journey, we are happy to do so. You can route those requests through our contact there, and we'll also follow up and send this information out to all attendees.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlie, Bob. Awesome presentation today. Appreciate all of your support. All of you that hung on throughout. I know we're a few minutes over, so just want to say thank you and have a great day. We appreciate it. Please reach out with any questions. Take
Thanks
care.
all.
Thank you.